Welcome to the annual BPI lecture 2025. Tate Lehohla, I thought when we'll get this people rejuvenated in the new year, in the month of February, the month of love. Therefore, one will assume that we'll extend that love through our body language also, non-verbal communication. The theme or the topic of the lecture, I hope that my pronunciation will be proper today. Whether a democratic dividend or democratic disaster, what is to be done? When I read the invitation, the immediate caption in my mind was a poem. And when reading that poem, the immediate caption was also extended when I read the abstract. I further extended this caption to poetic justice when you read the abstract by Justice Salbi Sak. I don't know what's the pronunciation, VC. I've been struggling with this pronunciation. But then I consoled myself. I said, I'm not sure on the pronunciation, but my aunt once told me when she was in class, her teacher, I think they were in grade 4, 5 then, her teacher wanted to introduce them to a musician known Masekela. So the teacher introduced the name of Masekela, pronouncing it as Masekela. And therefore, I guess that pronunciation in that context is relative. So, as we begin the program this evening, I'm going to invite to the podium the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Professor Pali Lehohla. This is the biggest university in the continent in terms of size and shape. We've just below 1.2 million alumni, 370,000 students per annum, 1 million students applying every semester, wanting to study with the university. As we welcome Professor Pali Lehohla.
Thank you very much, Professor Snokwani. Oftentimes we forget to introduce the program directors. Professor Snokwani is an associate professor of ethics, an expert on systematics, but also is the current executive director of the university marketing and communication. So let me thank him before he starts his responsibility. He has already invited us to literary studies, to politics, to imagining the theme that you're bringing to the fore on democracy in Tate Lehohla. But I also heard him impel on us an idea. I thought you'd have affirmed it. He says, love is the foundation of philosophy and imagining the future. And I didn't hear anybody nod. Perhaps because scholarship has become functional and sometimes devoid of these ideas and philosophies that require us to be attentive as we serve society. So if government was a government of love, what would it be about? And if democracy was anchored by love, what policy decisions would we undertake? I think the conversation between philosophy, public affairs, public administration, and politics is quite important. We forget philosophy in discourse analysis when we think about government, governance, and as well democracy. So colleagues, let me recognize yourself, Professor Snokwani, the program director. Sorry, colleagues, I need an inventor of multifocal lenses. I apologize. Let me recognize Professor Lakima Tebula, the chairperson of the board of the Pool of Ideas Foundation, Dr. Pali Lehohla, the former Statistician-General and a lecturer for this annual BPI Foundation lecture, and a great friend of the University of South Africa. Let me acknowledge the moderator, Mr. Mike Siluma, the deputy editor of Sunday Times. It's funny you're here, but we are quite appreciative of your presence. Sunday Times is a welcome accompanier in reflecting on discourses on society. So can I request that you give him a round of applause? I think it's a matter of love and courage to be at UNISA, Mr. Siluma, and we are quite happy that you have had that courage to be here. You know why, so we'll talk. Then let me acknowledge Professor T. Ilof, Dr. Ntabiseng Muliko, Mr. Daryl Sonapul, Dr. Kefilo Masiteng, the former deputy statistician. We only know you in multilateral systems, and we often forget that you crunch the numbers. So thank you very much, Dr. Masiteng, for being here. Dr. Miranda Muloto of the BPI Foundation, senior officials and executives from government, business, and university sector, members of the diplomatic corps, fellow UNISANs, academics, students, staff of the university. I also recognize colleagues from Tshwane University of Technology, Northwest University, and other universities. I know that they are present, hence I'm naming those universities. Good afternoon. I am truly honored and privileged to be here to welcome you to the University of South Africa as UNISA, to the University of South Africa. As UNISA, we welcome the BPI Foundation, its leadership and associates, and hope that the lecture will nourish and stimulate more ideas and debates about the past, the present, and the future of South Africa and the African continent as a whole. We do so understanding that the reflections on knowledge, on analyzing the past, the present, and the imagination of the future is not something that is done in a linear process, but as we would have stated, is a multidisciplinary engagement that anchors not only the numbers, but the quality of the policy systems, the ideologies or ideas that anchor them, as well as the practicalization, if we would dare say, the praxis of leadership in enhancing democracy. The idea of South Africa and the idea of debating the state of South African democracy will always be important in the public discourse. And we hope that as an African university shaping futures in the service of humanity, we can add value as a platform through which such dialogues, discussions, contestations, and reimagination or co-construction of new ideas will find space and will be harnessed. Writing about the mid-19th century France in 1852, in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, the period of the transition between the Second French Empire and the Second French Republic, Karl Marx had the following to say about the appearance of facts and personalities in history. And he refers to Hegel, if you remember the dialectic theorization and the contestation between the idea, the synthesis, and the contestation. He says, Hegel remarks somewhere that all great world historic facts and personages appear, so to speak, twice. He forgot to add the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. So it's very important that since through the lens of political actors and observers of history, society has come to appreciate this profound observation by Marx to mean generally the history repeats itself. I'm not sure, Dr. Lehohla, you're the one who will be giving us a lecture. You'll help us to understand and discern whether some of these theories find expression within our context. But if I recall in the history, within the same time that Marx is making a commentary, in the context of Southern Africa, there were different contestations around the type of leaderships that our forebears would have wanted to form. Whether you think about Moshoeshoe, Mantatisi, Shaka, and others. How did they imagine the future and the ideas of protecting or creating governance? This could be the dialogical aspects of also drawing on those epochs which are quite central in the current presence. Looking at the history of democracy and efforts of national development in Africa, almost 8 decades after the defeat of formal colonialism, with all the ebbs and flows of the democratic dividend, and situating our democratic experience within the wider African context, is it possible that we see today is an appearance of facts and personages, so to speak? Twice, the first time as tragedy, and the second time as farce. And if we look at the democratic turmoil, or even crisis, if you like, characterized by the rise of the right-wing ideology and populism, whether in the Euro-Americas context or even in our continent, what is the verdict that we can give about the thesis of the end of history and the last man? What does experience and data say about certain types of political systems and economic models that have governed the world in the past century? Whereas I often look at reality through the lens of optimism, I cannot but reflect on the weight of history on our own experiences of democracy as South Africans and indeed as Africans. One of the questions that linger on my mind is how the successes and the setbacks of democracy have also to do with the colonial legacy which we experience as neocolonialism in Africa today. And that I want to put as a question. And precisely because of this question, can we think of democracy as a universal concept and a practice to the extent that we can say one size fits all? Delivering the 2023 Founders Lecture under the theme Pan-Africanism, Revisiting and Reimagining, a renowned international peace and justice scholar, Professor Horace G. Campbell, enjoined us to think about 2 critical tasks of Africans. He speaks around self-definition and the emancipation of Africa's descendants worldwide. He also speaks about the support for the revitalization of Africa, thereby elaborating on the humanity of Africa's peoples, not only in the continent, but abroad. I think we know that what Professor Campbell was trying to say to us, and we know that even as he was trying to conscientize us to thinking about Africa not just as a geospatial horizon, but also with these experiences of being Africa global, whether from paleontology or whether from political systems and migrations. This invites us to imagine even more. I'm discussing the idea of free, democratic South Africa by situating it in the wider context of the project of emancipation and the unity of Africa, deliberately because I truly believe that democracy can only succeed if its true emancipation is to be realized. And that can only happen if we must do and undo just embodying knowledges around what we are told democracy is about. Even primary students know that democracy is people for the people, and etc. But are we people for the people? Are our policies attentive to the ecological systems, the validity of empowering humanity to live with dignity? Are we just promoting facts and personages, or are we looking into the emancipatory project? What do we do about the Berlin case that Congo is also contending with, even in our relationship with Congo? So South Africa's democracy is not just for its own sake, but it also has tentacles that are entwined with the continent as it is in the global arena. So colleagues, as I welcome you to the University of South Africa, I thought before the key lecture is shared, for us to journey together, to think about the models, the ideas, the scholarship, and the centers of excellence that we need to recreate so that our democracy, sometimes without the economic dividend, is important to strengthen the economic transformation, the empowerment of youth and young adults, whom majority are wallowing in the streets without the requisite tools, policies, and opportunities for strengthening their participation. I also, as I welcome you to this University of Leaders, the university that has nurtured the 3 democratic leaders of this country and their contribution to the democratic project, equally that has been attentive to the economic transformation of our country and continent by ensuring that we nurture and develop the first Governor General, the one whose image or the one who signs our currency and therefore is always looking and out to protect our currency. It's quite important for us as the university to appreciate the role that science, the agenda for transformation, the discourse with the public sector, private sector, civil society, and multilateral systems become a horizon and a conversion point for our reflexivity. So welcome to UNISA, the home of leaders, the university committed to nurturing and shaping the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Lehohla, the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa. I always brag that, sometimes people can speak English, but English does not correspond with content. Sometimes you have content and you are lacking the lingua. It does happen. But in UNISA, we are gifted with a Principal and Vice Chancellor who has all of the 2. Thank you very much, VC. And we once more want to thank you for having allowed that the annual BPI Lecture 2025 is hosted within the premises of UNISA. UNISA operates on an open door policy, of course, not at the expense of denting and damaging the brand of the institution. But we invite communities, different stakeholders, to come and hold their activities within the institutions, of course within the parameters of the existing policies of the institutions. We are going to move to the next speaker on the agenda, Prof. Lakima Tebula, who is the chairperson of the Foundation of BPI, board chair. Perhaps I should welcome him with a question, because the invitation and the topic of the event is in a question. So maybe to simplify it for everyone who's here as a guest, maybe I should ask a question of Albert Einstein. And I quote, "A question that sometimes drives me hazy Am I or are the others crazy? Sometimes when a question is posed, whether a democratic dividend or democratic disaster, demographic disaster, what is to be done? Am I or the others crazy? As I welcome Prof. Matebula.
Thank you, Program Director Moruti Snokwane. I did not know that Baruti would study question. I know pastors to be giving answers. I'll try to answer your question at the end of welcoming everybody. Let me write on all the protocols that the VC has so ably done for us, but let me acknowledge Nkosana Thobela, the founder, executive director of the BPI. He is here, Nkosana Thobela. Thank you. And it is very rare that you come to a conference and when you look into the audience, you see an old friend of your mom, and you don't say anything. Dumela Mamkoto. This was a friend of my mom. Let me acknowledge the head of the African Peer Review Mechanism, Dr. Eddie Maloka, who is here with us. And let me also acknowledge our former ambassador to Sudan, General Yekela, who is also joining us today, accompanied by Dr. Telela Vika from Wits University. And I think I've written the protocols and supplemented what the VC did. Thank you, VC. Let me express my gratitude to UNISA for being the inaugural host of the BPI annual lecture. And who knows, with good collaboration, nothing stops us and stops the BPI from making this a long-term arrangement. This is a very historic event that we started this lecture at UNISA. Thank you, VC Puleng, and thank you, Professor Snokwane, for the logistics. Let me thank Arena Media for anchoring the lecture as a media partner and for recommending Date Mike Siluma. We call him Mike, an experienced journalist and editor in South Africa. Mike is an institution of journalism in the subcontinent. He is as much a footnote in African journalism as he is an endnote. Thank you, Mike, for being part of this historic beginning. We appreciate it. And if you know the BPI, you must ask yourself that, or you must start imagining that if we start our lecture by inviting Professor Pali Lehohla, and you have seen our award ceremonies, how they were going up, you can just imagine who is next in the next year to actually be our next lecture. Nkosana told me that he got a WhatsApp from Barack Obama. I don't know what was in the WhatsApp. If it can be reduced to measurables in Tate Lehohla, it competes with rhetoric. And that is what guided us to choose you as the first inaugural lecture, because we respect your respect for numbers. So because numbers remove rhetoric, we thought we should get you to be an inaugural lecture so that you determine the cadence of our lectures. The BPI unapologetically It's a middle class project by South Africa's courageous middle class. We are not apologetic about that. We are a middle class, most of the members, and this is a project of making sure that this middle class has the right content to guide this country. Without a middle class, society tends to lose direction. It is designed to ensure that this democracy outlives us and the many other generations after us. We are not ready to outlive the democracy. We want the democracy to outlive us. And that's why the BPI was thought of. We are reclaiming our ideation position as citizens of a country which is home to 30% of the world's minerals reserves. This is a country that has 40% of the world's gold reserves. This is a country that has 90% of chromium and platinum resources. It's a country that removes a heart from one human being to the other. It's a country that converted coal to petrol. We are not an ordinary country. We are not ordinary. And the sooner we realize that, as South Africans, as the middle class, the better we can start to be positive about our society. We're a country that was able to produce a language that is a language of science and commerce, and that language is less than 150 years. And it is already competing with languages that have millennia. Nothing stops us to take isiZulu, Sepedi, Setswana, Xitsonga, Tshivenda, and all other languages to that level if we are serious about it. This is the country that we belong to. We are becoming a standard regarding using the rules-based global order. The fact that we were able to take Israel to the ICJ purely on the basis of what the law says. Let's take away the politics that are happening in the Middle East. We just said when we look at this thing, we see genocide, let the court prove us wrong. And if the court said we are wrong, because of our respect for the rule of law, we would have accepted that we are wrong. In as much as we expect everybody to accept that they were wrong when they said it's not a genocide. And this is a country. If you remember the lawyers that were there, we saw the sharp legal minds that were there, and that shows us that we're not a Popeye country. So those harassing Eastern DRC might find themselves in the ICJ for the less reported genocide that is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. South Africa will not leave them untouched if we find that there's genocide there. The BPI is a platform of engagement. It is an outlet for thought through ideas, both as a think tank and collaborating with other think tanks. It is supported by an advisory board, the executive director I introduced, the young Reverend Nkosana Tobela, and a team of committed volunteers like Keke Mukotong and many others that I don't have the time to call. BPI hosts the Iconic Excellence Award VC and this annual lecture series in 2025. There will be a minimum of 4 seminars this year on various topical areas supportive of South Africa's strategic affairs, including the G20 hosting. We're prepared to collaborate with UNISA if UNISA has appetite. Let me thank you for coming. The order of the day doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Mike, who will be ably supported by the brains we have here. And Dr. Tiens Ilof, I'm going to say it in the language that you'll be very excited. Is 'n omvang van Suid-Afrika se toekoms en is 'n begrip van die mag wat lê en 'n dialoog is vir my altyd buitebeerd. Ke leboha ntate Pali Lehohla ka dipalopalo tsa hae ho tlisa nnete pepeneneng. Pali Lehohla o nka dipalopalo a tlisa nnete pepeneneng. Your legacy will always be that of making numbers to talk. Those that don't listen to you, they have themselves to blame. Bomme Thabiseng Moleki le Kifile Matsiteng, re leboha your ability to show us that until it has landed on the Mbogoto, we can't eat. It's about Mbogoto, you know? And let me also thank Dr. Sonepul for agreeing to our invite, and we're happy that you came. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let these broadly pulled ideas blossom. We're waiting to hear Ntate Lehohla, and we're waiting for you with questions. Please allow me to transfer your question to Ntate Lehohla. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Matebula. I couldn't comment on the speech of the Principal and Vice Chancellor because of the English that she was using. But at least for you, I can try to say something, accompanying your message. The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. These were the words of Winston Churchill. That 5 minutes is critical because it speaks to the experiences of the ordinary voter, immediate experiences on how they understand and interpret democracy, whether it works or it does not work for them. That's why they say that that 5 minutes is critical as the best argument to make a determination whether democracy works or not. As we move to the next item of the agenda, because we are moving behind schedule, we are going to invite the main speaker of the day. And I don't think he needs any introduction, except to say that Dade Lehohla is a former Statistician-General the Republic of South Africa. Dade Lehohla, every time I think of you, I imagine parables. And Nietzsche says this about parables. On every parable, you write to the truth. Unquote. It's very interesting that when you also read what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross states, and I quote before I make it relevant to our context. According to my parents, I was supposed to have been a nice, church-going Swiss housewife. Instead, I ended up an opinionated psychiatrist, author, and a lecturer in the American Southwest who communicates with spirits from a world that I believe is far more loving and glorious than our own, unquote. In short, what Elizabeth is doing, she equates the university with the world of spirits and says that it is loving and glorious than our own world. I hope that by answering the question, whether a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster, what is to be done, we shall appreciate the other world of spirits. Thank you very much.
That is no one. Director of the program. When I called, it was under strict instructions from Dade Tobert I called and you answered, and it happened, and we are here. Vice Chancellor, Professor Lingabula, Dadema Tebola, Chair of BPI, my co-presenters, Mentabise Muleko and Megifilo Masiting, and the other two co-presenters, and the moderator, Dades Luma. I am presenting on some topic that, as Dades Nogwani characterizes it, I probably have to say maybe I should change the topic, but now it's too late because my presentation has captured it that way. Because I might prove to be fairly inadequate in managing it. If I could have the screen up instead of the red, I happen to have addressed the EFF, and I came with the reds a bit. Professor Maluka, your book is part of what inspired me to think about either a democratic dividend or a democratic disaster. When the Calabash Awards were given by the Chancellor, President Beki, he had invited Justice Albie Sachs. And Albie Sachs said something very profound, that in his intervention, that we have the country, but do we have the society? And I thought that I should elaborate and follow this a little bit to ask the question whether a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster. I tried to explore the nexus of democracy and demography and pathways towards how those two can converge and probably deliver the dreams of the RDP. My former office, in the course of thinking that way, then released the IES of 2022, Income and Expenditure Survey. I was crossing my fingers that that data point will be available. And when it arrived, it released the tension that I had of speculation, in that at long last I could talk even to the current facts and say, what is the interpretation that I will assign and ascribe to these facts? Little did I know that there was no air conditioning here, and I thought that I should bring my own air conditioner. And part of my presentation is this air conditioner, because in it, we are asking the question, what can drive the needle in South Africa and make it better? What is it that is significant and can make significant contribution to the poor? I'll end up with that. The release of the IES put me in a bit of a conundrum as I explored the numbers. Because in it, it revealed what Keynes advised Roosevelt to do. But in the same data, we see Milton Friedman. In the end, you actually don't have Keynes nor Milton Friedman. And this is where the weakness of our policy designs are, that we wallow through life without a clear path of where we are going. And that contradiction of Keynes and Milton Friedman has landed us in this chaos that we have. My laptop is asking whether I can see the pictures. So what is the outline? I actually think that we have an enduring legacy of Fairwood. And I explore the evidence from the 2022-2023 Income and Expenditure Survey, how the data reinforces the practices of Fairwood, And how do we undo the mental shackles from a systems thinking and systems design point of view? And what can we do around the greatness of the future, which is here, and energy systems of the future, and lift the poor out of poverty? The enduring legacy of Verwoerd starts with a vote in 1953 in the parliament of the country on the 23rd of September, when he said, what is the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't do it in practice? We haven't resolved that legacy, because even now the president, the minister of education, the MECs of education, the principals of high schools, the parents, the children, all run into this madness of ensuring that Verwoerd is alive and well in his grave. That we run away from mathematics because we want those indicators that make schools show that they are progressing on nothingness. You see, when Verwoerd said in 1953, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? Here you see the Indians, the blacks, Africans, and the colors, all huddled together like bananas in the dark. And you see the whites up there. And when Verwoerd said, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? You see the Indians actually taking a different route, altogether a different route. And what you see in the income and expenditure survey, a number of years later, it is that departure that the Indians deliberately followed. And when you look at that chart there, you can see the acquisition of higher education by the whites against the blacks. The proportion of those with degrees amongst whites, it's almost like the proportion that you'll find in Korea. Around the blacks, this is the thin proportion that you get. And this is 80% of the population. You can't run a country with this kind of thing. Not that skill. In 100 years, in 1,000 years. And that pattern is not changing up to today. And is reinforced by saying, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? And therefore we go for maths literacy. Transitioning from there into university, there is an issue around intergenerational value. If the graph goes up that way, there is intergenerational value. If the graph is going down that way, it means it's disaster. And therefore, there we see amongst blacks and coloreds that generational disaster, demographic disaster. And amongst Indians, you can see they'll be catching soon with the whites. I did the same analysis for census 2022, and you see the patterns actually similar. And you see whites there, Indians there, blacks and coloreds hovering downwards in terms of progression ratios. This cannot deliver this country out of disaster. Now you see, even now you see those dogs barking at each other. The gate is open. And that's where we are trapped. We cannot go over that gate. This is where we are. And even the elephant, once it's released, it still thinks it's tied. And the elephant in the income and expenditure survey is so palpable. The evidence is so palpable. Here we find that the income and expenditure survey that the Statistician-General released on the 28th of January, I hope a lot of you looked at that. And I hope it is hope and true. And it gives you average annual household consumption as well as the median. What is more important is the reinforcing practices. Here I saw Keynes, and yet I also saw Milton Friedman. For the first time, the black consumption, expenditure, shares, surpassed that of whites, 62%, from 41%. Rose to 62%, and that of whites dropped from 45 to 45% to 25%. On the back of indeed around 2022, around the SDR. What is it, SDR or SRD? The money that government gave for COVID to people. It rose that figure to 62%. And that means of the expenditure of 3 trillion, blacks had buying power of 1.8 trillion. The question is, what do blacks do with that income? And this is where the dog fights the other dog. And they don't want to meet, even if the gate is open. Now, this is a sad story. A real sad story of where blacks actually buy and spend their money. You see, in South Africa, and I have all African countries here. In South Africa, we have large shops, medium and small shops, specialized shops, private service providers, and public and semi-providers. And then we have these ones, the markets, where blacks and the foreigners fight. 1.28% and 1.57%. Here are the checkers, and all these are owned by white. That's where the 1.8 trillion goes. And now this is where Keynes, in terms of ensuring that you make money available for consumption, works. But if on the other side, there's no industrialization, that money will go to these outlets for consumption and no industrialization by blacks. The question, therefore, whether a demographic dividend or a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster arises as a consequence of these consumption patterns. That a Keynesian accident, because it's not by design. If it was by design, government would have done this thing differently. Neither did they know about Milton Friedman, nor did they know about Keynes. Because if they understood Keynesian economics, they would have gone deep into industrialization as they make that money available and make blacks suddenly surpass consumption by whites. And then turn the tables in order to make the blacks begin to enjoy the benefits of democracy. This is just a table that shows the same figures. And here, of course, the middle class is suffering. And it has suffered all the time. And that's what the numbers show. In 2011, you can see that those with secondary and tertiary, those in 2015 and even today, in 2006 to 2023, the middle class is actually having a declining expenditure. And that is substantial. Some decreases are at 19%, and therefore there's absolutely no generational value. Now, the shares of income. You see, the top 10% that enjoys 50% of the income consists of 73% of whites, 40% of Indians, 20% of coloreds, and only 13% of blacks. That's where the 10%, the 50% is concentrated. The accommodated blacks, who constitute 13%, are there. They are accommodated. That includes us, the BPI. The bottom 40% only has 4%. And that is not changing. You can see from 2006 to 2023, that is not shifting. Now, you see, this is the money that government provides, pensions and so on. This part of the money that government provides, here, this 51% and 29% goes straight to these outlets and never go via industrialization. So you cannot see development. That money is not active developmental finance because our plans are based on Milton Friedman. and not following through with Keynesian economics. So in a system of government that follows both Keynes and Milton Friedman at the same time, then we have a perfect Madibuse Ngajin Green, who's already. Yeah? Now, here is an interesting pattern for women. But this is the falsification of statistics at times. Across this time, women made the biggest gains across in terms of this income and expenditure survey. However, it is based on low base. Low base effects exaggerate progress. And you have to understand that. However, there is also an issue around this progress that they have made. As of 1996, in the first census that we ran, I ran these tables to see percentage of women that actually complete degrees relative to men. You can see the gap was so huge here. That gap begins to close here by 2001, closes by 2011, and in the census of 2022, women overtake men. And that, as a consequence, you see this income that they get. Increasing incomes even across this time, although they started from a low base. So, what is it that the income and expenditure survey tells us? It tells us that real income per capita have been declining, especially in 2011 to 2015 and 2015 to 2023, significantly on the middle class. And that middle class is shrinking and dying. In fact, when you look at these expenditure patterns here, you can see how severe it has been in 2011 to 2015 and 2015 to 2023. So when you think about the government of national unity, and you think about the ANC with its rhetoric on Keynesian economics, and DA with its capitalist Milton economics, you have a combination of Keynes and Milton. In Lesotho, we used to have the BNP, which was doing this, showing peace, and then we had the BCP that had the Nobkiri. When they started marrying in the way that the ANC is marrying with the DA and the government of national unity, he said, my national aids are cloak out. Now you can see the toy in blue. The hodgepodge of policies that are inconsistent is a worrying problem because it delivers these kinds of things. So you can see here, upper quintile, that's what the blacks have, the accommodated blacks, against their counterparts here, 73% of whites. The Indians in 1953 moved, and that's why they're at 40.6. The question is, what are the blacks doing to move from that 13% to a more decent quintile in terms of incomes, in order that the democracy generates a dividend? At the moment, it doesn't, and the current policies are far from doing so. So, what you see here is average expenditure, average for blacks, and that is down here, and that's whites. This 67%, 67,000 goes into 350,000 by a big factor of 5. The levels of inequality are just alarming. And you see, now, here we see a decline in that income. You see 92,000 is what it was in 2015. It has dropped to 81,000 for blacks in 2022, according to the results of the Statistician-General. And income for whites has absolutely stretched out that way. So what is it then that we are seeing here? We can see that white income is 4.7 times that of African income. And in time, that white income by 2022 was 5.8 times, increasing the inequality. At the heart of this condition that continues to this day are policies that are toying in blue. So what does that mean in terms of skills? Why are we in this kind of dilemma? So I looked at the skills from 1994, the people that are employed in 1994 with some skills, and I look at that up to 2024. We are waiting for the report of the Statistician-General for 2024. The tale will be the same. So by 1994, the inequalities were known and were understood. With those with skills very, very low amongst blacks and coloreds, and amongst Indians and whites more reasonable. Over time, we see the blacks and coloreds staying almost the same. We go to 2020, we see the same thing. We go to 2021, it's not different. We go to 2022, it's not different. In 2022, you can see that the blacks and the coloreds here are trapped at about 17%, when these whites and Indians are actually flying. That's the level of skill acquisition, amassing skills. But these two groups are only 10% of the population. These are 90% of the population, and they don't have the skills. And we hope that we can go forward. The democratic dividend is bound to reverse. It will not go forward. It shows in terms of the employment. As of 2008, 1.6 million young people aged 15 to 24 were employed, and here 4.8 million were employed. As of today, fewer, 1 million only are employed from 1.6, and here is 4.7 instead of 4.8 in a growing population. That means acceleration of a disaster. So I've shown you this in terms of skills. And we celebrate this 250,000 students, so many black students. The reality is not these absolute numbers. The reality of black performance relative to white performance. And Nick Spoll, I told him off. I said, Nick, you cannot present absolute numbers without denominators because they are false. The real performance of blacks is this one here, relative to that of whites up there. It is not this one. These absolute numbers are just good for politicians and nothing else. Now here is the reality. The reality of progression into higher education. This is where blacks are, this is where coloreds are, and this is where Indians are moving, and they are surpassing whites. You see that blue and purple, and the blue and purple in whites, and that in blacks in tertiary education, and this litany of disaster in there, and amongst colors. This is disastrous. Well, demographic transition. Indeed a transition, but without a dividend in South Africa. In China and all these other countries where South Africa was a compatriot, and more likely in Latin America, blacks have not had that demographic dividend, although they have had a demographic transition of fewer children. I will talk about that for a long period. But here is where it is. China, with that transition, made sure that there is a dividend of 6.9% annually, whereas amongst South Africans, it's only 1%. I don't know what I'm doing up to time. But here is the reality. Income per capita is how you try to raise society. And that can be done through labor, productivity, that is productivity, through absorption rate in terms of trade. On all these three paths, we end up with a demographic dividend. But in South Africa, it cannot be, because those paths are not working. They are a combination of Keynes, a hodgepodge of Keynes and Milton Friedman policies, all in the same pot, and hoping that they'll deliver something to the nation. They will not. The inequality amongst blacks is the highest compared to that of whites. When blacks are that unequal, there cannot be peace when 80% of the population is so unequal. There cannot be peace in the country. And doing the mental shackles, Mwana Mhlomi, Vice Chancellor, says that he was at Godile Morena Mutlomi was the sage of Modile. He ran a leadership school in 1840. He trained Moshweshwe, he trained Skukun. And he is, as Mark Dupree would say, the Aristotle of the Free State, of the Valley of the Free State. That's Moshweshwe. He says a responsible leader pursues peaceful and productive alliances, accommodates stakeholders, and uses new instruments of power to create intergenerational value. Do our politicians in South Africa today ascribe to this? If they did, what does the evidence say? He actually looked at a number of things that define transformational leadership. Peace, productivity, that creates intergenerational value, and integrated reporting. You go to government and ask, where is your system of planning? I remember sitting, you used to put these files on top of each other. There's no system of planning in government. Absolutely none. I know that because I was there. I've seen it, I've critiqued it, it still is not there. Apartheid did better, and they had something that they tried to give to Statistician, and I said, well, we are statisticians, can you take this to the RDP? There was a man by the name of Perry there, his name was Perry. They had this system, which was a massive one, input and output tables, the SAM and other things that they could do to model. We lost that possibility. So what we owe each other? How am I doing for time? That is no point. I hope I'm not, because I promised mentor be saying. You see, Monique Shafiq says a number of things about what we owe each other. When we are young, we go to school. When we are getting older, we work. And then when we are at my age, we go on pension. But now the Minister of Finance says you should take a third of your pension and eat it when you are here. Will you go into pension? You can't. You'll fight over that with your children. And that is happening in many black families already. So what are these policies and what are they meant for? You see, systems design and systems thinking is very important at looking at what achievement means, what is the freedom to achieve, and what are the means to achieve. Following Amartya saying, I don't know whether we actually ask those questions in government and design policies that do that. Mentor Biseng will talk about a lot about the pathways. Suffice to mention that at ADRS, we modeled and said it is possible to grow at 5%. And growing at 5% means a lot of policies have to change. And each of the policies is tabulated there and the contribution is given. And yet the government ignored all that. Particularly these macro reforms, which talk to Treasury and the Reserve Bank. This is where we see money being given out to help people in distress, but no industrialization happening. And that money then goes, that 1.8 trillion goes for consumptive capital without getting the benefits of industrialization. So this is the kind of country that we are in that really fails to think. So this is what happens. 62% of 3 trillion going straight to macro, going straight to all these other things. And then on top of that, you add a third of the pension so that you can go and eat magwinya and acha. So, what is this greatness of the future? I didn't cause the system of cooling not to work. I didn't know that it would not work. I didn't even know where you were going to sit by sunset. But you will soon immerse yourself in some interesting cooling as this air comes straight into your face. This cooling system is a product that has been constructed by Mujalefa Murphy, a South African nuclear physicist who used to be at that place where we made bombs. He worked there. More recently, he came back and we met over the past 2 years, he's been working on this. This is Phuket. It cools without using HVAC. It just uses water and the motor. It cools to what is dew point. And dew point is that temperature where air condenses into moisture. And you don't need HVAC, you don't need a condenser, you don't need a refrigerant, you don't need a compressor, you don't need all those things. You just use these air. And I'm sure, Vice Chancellor, you are feeling the cool air where you are sitting. This is the seventh prototype that we have invented. And it works. Our view is this: we must disrupt the energy systems of the 20th century by introducing the 21st energy systems that are based on Newtonian laws of if there are two surfaces, one that is slightly cooler than the other, evaporation will occur. It is evaporative cooling, but not evaporative cooling to wet bulb, but towards dew point. And we are in the process of going towards refrigeration at no cost except God's given sun, because then we can even have a solar panel. With this technology, we can use our coal, we can use everything that we have, we can use our nuclear. This, we believe, should be centered around cooperatives. And the cooperatives must disrupt the expenditure patterns that we have witnessed over the last 30 years. It's about 17 people that have come together. We have put our money in that. We are looking at building cooperatives as a model, because manufacturing this is the way to go. It will de-risk ESCOM's demand for energy, but it will also expand access to cooling. What are the statistics? 20% of energy consumption in South Africa is to cooling, and it's only for those who actually afford cooling. But we can expand cooling to every school, to every hospital, to every child, to everyone in the country. And it will cost very little and dramatically change the lives of people. Mujalefa's mother, on a deathbed, said, "Mujalefa, my son, nuclear physicist, what's the use of your education if you can't use it for resolving the problems of development?" And Mujalefa left Canada, where he could have sold this IP for millions and billions. He said, "This must be in South Africa." We have been working on this, and it has the potential of industrialization. The possibilities and versatility of this technology is vast, absolutely vast. In car cooling, in electric car cooling, in nuclear energy plant cooling, in cooling households, in food security. An Afrikaner who we work with said, "Don't think about these data centers, think about food security." We see $61 billion rands being thrown away of food because of lack of cooling. And this is the solution. Thank you very much. You wanted to feel how it feels.
So VC, that Lehohla says to me, I say, it's making noise, and he says to me, but yours is not working. Yeah. Yeah, no, there has been a report that they are, there was something trapped, and they were working on it. I wanted to understand in simple terms what Ndate Lehohla was doing today. Because I sometimes don't mix statistics with politics, economics. social sciences. But then I came across a quotation by Carl Pearson, and it says that statistics is the grammar of science. So if anyone wants to understand what was happening during your presentation, they must understand that you're using the grammar of science to unlock, unpack, engage on issues that affect us as a society, politically, economically, and otherwise. And we appreciate your insights every time, Ntate Lehohla, that when you speak, there is sense. Of course, we might differ there and there with you, but what matters most is that you always bring fresh insights into discourse in trying to unpack and us to understand what is happening with our society, and in answering the question that was posed by BPI's own program, Whither, a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster, what is to be done. Ntate Nkosana Thobela, the ED of BPI, I think I've not acknowledged you. And I think Ntate Matebula, Prof. Matebula has been acknowledged multiple times, but I think it will be fitting that we acknowledge you officially, so that people should not think that the program is on autopilot. There are leaders of BPI in our midst, and without wasting of time, I'm going to request the moderator of the next session for panel discussions or engagements, as I also acknowledged Prof. Eddie Maloka, the former CEO of APRM, African Peer Review Mechanism. I always tell him that he has the keys to Africa, to heads of states. And every time I see him, I also see wisdom. That VC, I always, when I meet him, I always tell him that we are going to meet with you and discuss our strategy moving into Africa. And for those who have been asking me about partnerships, there is a woman who's responsible for that by the name of Dr. Makhabani sitting there. She's the one who signs all the MOUs. If they make sense to her, they come to my office. If they don't make sense to her, they don't come to my office. So the program of BPI to go through her scrutiny, and she approved the program so that we are able to host this very interesting discussion today, conversation. As I call forward the deputy editor from Sunday Times to come and continue with the panel session, Ntate Mike Siluma. Thank you. Well, the VC is reminding me that there is a dean from the Thabo Mbeki school. Is it Thabo Mbeki alone? Because sometimes it has multiple names, and she's with Professor Mapoli from from KAES, College of Accounting Sciences. Agriculture, KAES, or not CAS, Agriculture, College of Agriculture. So, Prof, did they see you? Maybe just to wave? Both of, and this is Prof. Paswan, Edith Paswan. Thank you very much. As I call that day, Siluma to continue with the program.
For inviting me to, or rather for lumbering on my shoulders this task of trying to disentangle and hopefully give give longer legs to presentation Professor Lehohla. I have known Professor Lehohla for quite some time. I think when I first met him, I was editor of the Sowetan, way back. And he was the Statistician-General of South Africa. And in those days, he still wore his yellow suits, that atrocious yellow outfit, which I think a lot of people noticed. And it was much later that we all got to understand the madness behind the yellow suit. For the first time in South Africa, we had someone in that office who was actively promoting the importance of making evidence and fact-based decision-making. And he has stayed the course, even now. I thought that when he left office, he would go off and ride horses and retire. But it is a course that he has stayed. And I think, Professor Lehohla, it is quite admirable. And I think there are very few people who are doing what you are doing, but not just doing it in the serenity of their offices. There are many people who are doing research all over in the universities and elsewhere, but that research is almost as if it is made to go and sit in file 13. And most of us never get to hear about it. And I think that it's quite admirable that you're doing the academic and the research work, and you're actually championing it in public. I mean, you probably are the researcher who features the most in the media, on TV and everywhere else. Not because you are a superstar, but because of the substance that you bring to all the discussions about the problems that are facing our country. And by the way, just for that yellow outfit, I think you should have won many marketing awards. I think people were just not understanding you. And as we all know, Professor Lehohla, he probably is the most passionate intellectual in the country. Who intervenes with passion and often very aggressively. I think there are very few journalists who can stand toe-to-toe with you, Prof, when it comes to matters of research and the implications, for where the country should be going. But listening to Professor Lehohla right now, one is moved to notice that the conversation is happening at UNISA, Melinka, in an environment, in an academic environment, which leads one to the next question, which is that of the role of intellectuals and the intelligentsia in South Africa, in transforming South Africa of today. There are many different perspectives of what ought to be the role of the intelligentsia. One would be that the intellectuals are there to tell truth to power, which sounds very sexy, but it's not clear. And then do what after telling truth to power? The other one is of the school of thought that says that the intelligentsia should be, that its role is to influence and mobilize society with its ideas, presumably for the betterment of all. Which then leads one to ask, what happens when the nexus, the link between the intellectuals and the general public is severed? And what is the purpose of the work that the intelligentsia and academics are doing if it does not impact society, if it is meant to stay in the echo chamber of the rarefied echo chamber of the elite and I nearly used a term that is favored by by one of our political parties, which shall remain nameless, that the intellectuals are the leaders of society, you know. Now, if that nexus is severed, how does the intelligentsia lead and influence? Does it lead perhaps to a situation like what we have in the United States now, where despite prior warnings by the elite, the intellectuals, that the man who was wanting to become president would be bad for democracy, that is dangerous for democracy. He's going to break the tradition, you know, of how America has been governed. And in truth, he is living out what he had promised he was going to do. Now, what I'm asking is, where were the intellectuals and the intelligentsias in the United States? How does it happen that the intelligentsia warns society, talks about it every day, all the time, about the problem that is going to be befalling that society if Donald Trump becomes president, and the people go and give him a resounding victory? If we go to the United Kingdom, for example, they once had a prime minister called David Cameron, a very bright person, sensible, reasonable man, who got to a juncture in that country's history where there was a debate about whether the United Kingdom was better off staying in the European Union or leaving the European Union. And him and the intelligentsia, the majority of the intelligentsia in the UK thought that this was a no-brainer, you know, that the British people, you know, most of them ask, you know, I look at your numbers, Prof, about education, etc. You know, they probably looked at those numbers for the UK and thought, our people are learned, they're educated, you know, they're sensible people, and they understand what has been our role and the reasoning for belonging to the European Union. So he said, well, piece of cake, you know. If there are people who are saying we should leave the European Union, let's put it to a referendum, you know. In the great old British tradition, the people will choose sensibly. Fast forward to today, the United Kingdom is out of the European Union, and the chickens are coming home to roost now as to what a bad choice it was that was made. But I'm mentioning these examples. Well, in South Africa, let's come to South Africa, and let me try and be controversial. I know Prof likes to be controversial, so he'll support me if I can. Whether you like former President Jacob Zuma or not, whether you like his policies or not, I think in the run-up to the election, many of the intelligentsia believed that MKP was not going to go anywhere, because in part everyone knew that Jacob Zuma is not a fit, you know, for running South Africa, especially given what had happened in the past, you know. And despite the public sentiment among the intelligentsia, we got the result that we got in KZN and elsewhere, but in particular in KZN, that completely refashioned South African politics and probably will continue to impact on South African politics going forward. And then I ask again, you know, to say, how is it that the intelligentsia ends up thinking in one direction, which it believes is right, is progressive, that it modernizes society and does all those good things for humanity, and yet the people now and again will choose in the opposite direction. So I'm asking to say the presentation, for example, that Professor Lehohla has just made to us, which is very interesting, which is very important for all of us, you know, as South Africans to pay attention to. Many of the trends that are in the presentation are not unknown in South Africa. I mean, the broad trends, you know, for example, that Africans are the ones who are at the bottom of the pile, you know, as they have been in the past. And that white people and Indians are at the top, that, you know, colored people are somewhere in between. You know, sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, kind of thing. The question is, if our research, we have all this research in the country, because I'm sure Professor Lehohla is not hiding it under his bed or in his back garden or something. It is statistics which are released every year by, among others, Stats SA, which you Professor, were releasing these statistics for the longest time. But it does not look like there is a connection between the academic scientific work that is being done, that is availing the country, that is being made available to the country, and where the country is going and how the country is governed. And I think for me, the question that I would like to table, I know it's not on the agenda anyway, but I think that it is a backdrop question that might help us to understand why our country is not making progress. Why, in many respects, over a period of time, we actually are regressing, we're moving backward. So I'm saying all the work that we are doing in our academic institutions, all the graduates that we're producing, all the money that as a people of South Africa are spending in that effort, how can we get to a point where it begins to benefit the country, actually, where we prioritize finding solutions for the country and get the fashionable term and get bang for our buck. I hate it myself, but I know that it's a popular. Professor Lehohla has given us much food for thought, but we have not been left to our devices to try and make sense of everything that he has said. We have assembled here a panel of 4 prominent South Africans whose expertise and experience spans economics, politics, sociology, health, and you name it. So we thought that maybe we should ask them to help us to dig deeper and to help to understand more deeply the warning that Professor Lehohla is sounding for the country. I will ask them to come to the front in no order of importance. It is Dr. Kefilo Masiteng, Professor Tiens Ilof, Dr. Ntabiseng Moleko, and Mr. Darrell Swanepoel, I gather, is joining us virtually, but I am not seeing him. I'm sure we will be connected to him shortly.
Perhaps I should start by introducing the members of our panel. I've been advised to keep it cryptic. Like one line. Shall I start with Dr. Masiteng? Dr. Masiteng is the former head of Secretariat in the National Planning Commission and is currently working with the United Nations. I could go into more detail, but I've been advised to. Dr. Ntabiseng Moleko, who's on my left here, is a development economist and senior lecturer at Stellenbosch, and she is the board chair of the National Empowerment Fund. And then, can everyone see Mr. Swanepoel? Welcome again, Mr. Swanepoel. Thanks for joining us from a faraway place. Mr. Swanepoel is CEO of the Inclusive Society Institute. He has got a wide experience in the world of business and teaching as well. I see here it says doctor, but I've heard people call you Prof. Please correct me. You know, in journalism, some of the things we publish we can never take back. So we need to be very careful. We need to. Professor Elof is an academic and a director of companies. He has been with our country's journey since, to my recollection, since 1994 in many different roles, having started out in theology, and then he went into academia, went into business, and he was very actively involved in around the CODESA process and the multi-party negotiations. I hope there are enough people in here who remember what the multi-party negotiations were and all of that.
We thought we will start by asking our panelists in turn to give their response to the presentation by Dr. Pali Lehohla. I understand that Dr. Moleko has got a time pressure. Am I right? So we probably will start with her. Perhaps 3-4 minutes to give your impressions of the presentation by Professor Lehohla. I don't know if you want to be seated there or.
I think standing is better.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll just say all protocol observed. Thank you so much to the chair and also to the VC and to the program director. A very good day. I want to start with the point that has been made by the MC on why the dilapidation of society, where there's a divide between academia, what I call intellectuals, and also, I'd say, the policy process. I think that we have 26 universities, we have over 4,000 professors. If you go into associate professors in the different disciplines, South Africa is inundated with research and researchers. We've got NRF-rated researchers, and we've got a plethora of people that are very clever, that are very intelligent, that can help us solve some of the problems that we have. We are trying to debunk a lot of problems, but we actually have a lot of solutions. I think one of the issues is that the process of policy making and the process of generating knowledge has been made separate. The process of coming up with ideas and ideation and the issue of having problem statements, hypotheses that you're trying to resolve, and this what we call budget process, which we're all going to be inundated with soon, doesn't necessarily have very close linkages to these thinkers. If you go to all the economics departments, you may find that we have, of the 26 universities, every one of them has an economics department. How many of the research findings, the PhDs, and the different papers that are published are actually finding expression in the budget policy process? I can tell you now, very few. So this is the problem, is that we have to strengthen, and this is what many governments and nations have done. And I'm going to refer to a solution, because I think we can get inundated a lot of the time with the problems. We know the statistics. We know that we are in serious crises. I can show you even more stats that will put you in a very depressed state. You will leave this place. But I don't want to do that. What I want to do is give you some sign that we can get out of this, and it's a paper that I wrote with Prof. Swilling at Stellenbosch. I'm at the business school, and it's written New Wine into New Wine Skin. And what we're trying to do is to say, what are the alternative policy and reform mechanisms that we can put in place to get a different outcome? What are the measures that we put in place? Can we quantify them? We've done that through economic modeling and econometrics. I won't go into the detail. Hopefully the paper can be shared with your database. We also have said that if you don't do this, this is what will happen. We have projected that if we do what we call BUA, business as usual approach, and we don't change anything, we projected that unemployment will be at 38%. Guess what? Unemployment sits now at 41.9% as we stand. We projected that growth will be at 1.9%. Actually, let me go to the numbers. We projected that growth under business as usual will be sitting at a very constrained state where we see the indicator going down to 1.9. Guess what? MTBPS, the multi-budget policy process of National Treasury, caused growth, an estimated downward revision to growth last year from 1.9, I think, to 1.4%. The numbers are, they're in my head, but if I'm a bit sketchy, it's definitely been revised downwards to close to 1. We were at 0 point the year before. You know, things are not looking good. We said that if we don't change the policy trajectory, we therefore will remain with the problems we have. There's a lot of graphs on the GDP to debt ratio, on exports and trade services, on the investment levels, and what will happen to GDP and average growth if you do things differently. And I want to spend a little bit of time on, I'm not surprised about where South Africa is. I must be honest. I'm not surprised that growth is at 1.4 projected now. And the outer 3 years on average, maybe 2.4, 1.9, 1.7. And I can tell you every time we have budget policy statements, what happens? Growth is revised downwards. Why? Because the policy and the policy framework and the policy environment is stagnant. It is not moving. So why do we expect different outcomes? For me, that is the conundrum, is that unless we change the way the macroeconomic framework, our institutions, the management of our development finance institutions, if we are going to propose a thrust towards industrialization and industrial policy, there is no way that just happens without deliberate state intervention, right? And so what I want to focus my last 2 minutes on is to say this can be done. You need a couple of fundamentals, and we outline this, and we also project what happens if you implement these fundamentals. There are 7 pillars that are non-negotiables for me if you are going to see a change. Industrialization has to be a key growth driver. Why? You've got an unemployment crisis. You've got a spatial development crisis. You've got an unequal, or the most unequal society in the world crisis. You also have a social issue where you now have gender-based violence and murder and crime and all the related social problems that we have and are experiencing, very much related to the lack of dignity of our people because they're not productive. Very much related to the lack of economic activity in our people because they're excluded. There's a director of inclusion. All the economic inclusion instruments haven't yielded the kind of results which we have wanted to see because they haven't had broad-based economic access. They've had limited or trickle-down effect on very few, and mainly the elite. So it's good that you have a broadening and an approach as BPI to look at the middle class and retaining the middle class, but the issue now is that the broad masses who are in the low-income deciles are simply untouched by the economic growth and the economic, I'd say, expansion in South Africa, because we have an oligopolistic structure of an economy that the gains go to 4 or 5 firms in most economic sectors. Just a stat, on the turnover of revenue in most economic sectors, the turnover in most sectors in this country, we've spoken about the Gini inequality. You've heard it mentioned. Let me tell you about SMME inequality is worse than the Gini inequality when we talk about individual income inequality. Revenue in South Africa is condensed in most economic sectors, in your big firms, in your large firms, as shown by the former SG on his slide that shows that of the 1.8 trillion that South Africans have in the economy, 32% of those go to large firms. Even worse, if you look at the concentration in terms of how much share those big firms have in the total space in each sector, it's frightening. Even in the new industries of renewable, it's big firms that have up to 66 to 75%, if you measure what we call the HHI index, is frighteningly high. And so you've got to deconcentrate the economy. I think the 7 points I want to leave you with is that industrialization has got to be a non-negotiable. If we are to deal with unemployment, and if we are to deal with driving absorption and improving what we call the productivity, we have to have industrial activity in all the economic nodes, particularly those nodes that actually were economically repressed, what I call the economic wilderness. You've got to have labor absorbing strategies and target sectors that have labor absorption. This is a well-tested method. Have public employment programs beyond EPWP that are targeted and linked with university graduates and outputs of university. The HRD Council, or the former GIPSA Council, by the time you had the highest growth in South Africa, 2005, 6, 7, prior to the recession, it was because you had a program with the former President Mbeki where tightly linked to the growth strategy was the HRD strategy. Tightly linked to the growth strategy was what the industrial councils and the policymakers were saying need to be done, and they were executed in some form of a council. It doesn't help to have a plethora of councils, committees, and advisory bodies if the advice doesn't make room in the policy-making process. Because they're just there to make a noise, to make announcements, but they actually do not make any impact when decisions are made, when budgets are allocated, and when decisions that are going to affect the livelihood of most people in this country are made. The third one, and I'll stop there, and I'll encourage you to download this. It's called New Wine into New Wine Skin, and you put my name next to it, it'll be somewhere, but it is on the internet. Boost food production that is domestic and boost rural development. Unemployment and also poverty is an economic nodes where we have high level of rural areas, and poverty is there because there's very little economic activity. And it was like that by design. It's not by chance. It was designed like that. So unless you go and invest also economic infrastructure, but also the value chains of the economic sectors, particularly retail. There's a chapter where I disaggregate, the retail and the retail sectors, their concentration. But what needs to be done on transforming supply chain and also making sure that our people have an input into making sure that some of their household expenditure, they actually go back to them. That requires them to be part of the value chain. But if we're not talking about productivity and products, the chairs we're sitting on, the things we're drinking, the water, whatever, things you put in your hair, makeup that everyone uses, all these things that we're using day to day, who is making these polystyrene cups, these paper, the plastic, all the things we use day to day? If our people are not given implements, even small-scale manufacturing, using co-ops and also being given the necessary funding, we are going nowhere slowly. I think Chinua Achebe, who said that? Chinua Achebe. We're going nowhere slowly. But I think that the problem is that we have to aggregate at scale and massify at scale some of these things. I want to retract that if I'm quoting the wrong person, but I'm saying if we don't change the things, we are going nowhere slowly. So I want to say thank you. I was, by the way, Mike, I just want to say former NAF chairman. I'm not that anymore, but I have served my term so that you don't misquote and say, in the public domain, says the chairman. No, I'm speaking as an economist here, and that was my former role. Thank you so much.
Mr. Sonepul, do you want to come in at this point? You have got about, Dr. Muliko did 3.5 minutes.
All right, If we look at the research results, we found that if we had a GDP growth of less than 2%, then by 2029, the unemployment would grow to around 37.6%. If we had a GDP growth of around 3%, that unemployment would still grow to about 31%. And if we have a GDP growth of around 4%, that unemployment would grow to around 26%. We know that this research was done 3 years ago, and we know that we haven't got anywhere close to the 2%, and therefore we are seeing the continued unemployment growth. And it should come as no surprise to any of us that unemployment is growing. And to me, there is really only one solution, and that solution is get the economy right. If we can do all the social engineering we like, and I agree with the social engineering, we need to deal with inequalities in the country. It's shocking that unemployment for the black South Africans are touching 40%, but for white South Africans, it's still only around 7%. If a truly equal society, if there was 42% unemployment amongst blacks, then it should be 42% unemployment amongst whites. And therefore, this inequality question really needs to be addressed. But it's not going to help by making white people poorer. What we need to do is social engineering by bringing more people into the economy. And the good thing is that since the white population is basically employed, full employment is 4%, we're running at around 7%. So if you were to grow the economy, who are the people that are going to benefit? The people that are going to benefit from it will obviously be the black South Africans. But the type of economic policies that we have applied in the country has simply been business as usual. And we need to move it towards, as the previous speakers have said, and as Professor Pali has said, we need to move it towards industrialization. We need to move it to agriculture, and it's not going to do that by employing big capital again, because big capital only benefits small amounts of the community. We need to do it through cooperatives, and that is what I liked about what Professor Pali put on the table today, is that we need to broaden the participation of the black community. Otherwise, you're simply going to concentrate the economy into the hands of a minority amount of black people, but that's still not going to filter through and broaden the economic viability of the middle class. So that is the number one point in the country that we need to focus on. The demographic dividend or demographic disaster, as Churchill, I think, said, democracy is the worst form of government, but for all the rest. So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not a question of choosing between democracy and more autocratic governance. It is about giving meaning to democracy that delivers on the promises that our politicians are making. The other thing that I want to focus on, which hasn't come out yet, but it's got to do with just before I go there, I just want to mention on education. The problem with the education system is that we are delivering too many administrators, artists, linguists, etc. We're not delivering the type of skills that the business community needs. Industrial needs engineers. It needs scientists. We need financial accountants, etc. We're not delivering those in the numbers we should be delivering. So we need to rethink the way that, or the curriculum of the education system. The other area that worries me is social cohesion in the country, and we will be releasing tomorrow our South African Social Cohesion Index, and what the social cohesion shows us is that generally speaking, South Africa, out of a score of 100 scores, 53.2%, I think it is, 53.2%, which is in the same sort of line as what Germany, for example, does deliver. But that is not a true picture, because within that the indicators, the social cohesion indicators, issues such as, and all of this has been addressed in the presentations to now, is that the perception of fairness is extremely low. It's here in the low 30s. The respect for the rules in the country, extremely low. And the trust in our institutions to deliver it, extremely low. So if we do not build social cohesion in this country, it will not underpin a growing economy. And any economy with wonky social cohesion will not grow. And therefore, we need to give more focus to building social cohesion in this country as well. I think that is the 3 points that I'd like to make at this point. And then just on, Mike, your issue on why does the academic intelligentsia message not filter through to the man in the street, is maybe because our language is wrong. Maybe we talk at far too high a level. Maybe we should start talking in parables and make it easily digestible and understanding to the man in the street. Something that Professor Pali has very adequately done with making figures talk. I think let's leave it at that point. At that point for now, and we can add later.
Thank you, Mr. Sonepal, for your inputs. I think that you are finishing on a point that touches on social cohesion, and that tempts me to migrate towards Tiens because of his broad interactions and involvement in matters relating to where the country should go in the construction of the country, trying to and dealing with the challenges of nation building, basically, and social cohesion. I think the thing that I did not mention as well, which will explain why I'm saying I'm tempted to gravitate towards Tiens as our next speaker, is that Tiens has been involved with with issues in the Afrikaans community at various levels, and I think that he has got a perspective of one part of the society that many of us might not have. So when we talk about social cohesion and nation building, I think that he would probably be the best place to start at on the thing. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Mike. I will answer that question in due course. Let me first say that it's a privilege to be here. And I'm not just saying it because I've realized I can count the white people in this audience on my one hand. And therefore, to sit here and listen how you grapple under your guidance with issues is a privilege. I can't assume to know the answers. I can't even presume to give advice. But I can share and make some comments. Second point I want to make is, if you expected an intellectual, you will be sadly disappointed. I'm not an intellectual. When I first read Professor Lehohla's abstract, I thought, what did Lucky get me into this time? Because I had to read it 3 times just to understand it. But once I saw the pictures and I saw the statistics, obviously it became very clear. So thank you for that. I must also say, on another score, I'm not an intellectual, because someone said that the intellectuals didn't see MK coming. I, at the end of February last year, predicted that they would get between 10 and 12%. I was still 2% below the par, but because I saw what was happening in KwaZulu-Natal. I invested, third point, a lot in this country. I went in '87 to meet with the ANC leadership in Dakar. Eventually, I lost my job as a minister, as a Maruti, and I went into the business world, and we were involved in the peace process, helped to facilitate the peace accord of 1991, which I still believe is underestimated in its value to really lay the table for the negotiations to happen in '93, where I was head of the Secretariat of CODESA, and then later the head of administration for the multi-party process. Recently, as Mike said, I had been involved with a civil society, group of civil society organizations, Convergence for SA, before the election to try to get, especially young people, to get registered. And also before the election, I was involved in the facilitation of the Afrikaner Verklaring, or the statement which some of you may remember. We were very surprised that when it broke, sorry, Mike, different paper, but when it broke on the front page of City Press, 90% of the comments were positive, and when it broke on Netwerk 24, 50% of the comments were negative. And that's another question we'll have to talk about. But coming back to Prof's extremely good, but I must say depressing news that you gave us. I would like more people to know this. Not because I think we should all be depressed. By nature, I'm an optimistic type of person. But I think this picture should be painted out there. And I would very much like to paint it for the Afrikaans community. But that's another story. So on the question of the democratic dividend, I think it's fair to say that it has been a democratic dividend, but it was extremely limited. It is extremely limited. We have a democracy, we have a sustainable democracy, we've had elections, we've had the governing party losing its majority and accepting that. Many white people said the ANC will never accept it. I said, well, I believe there's a deep-rooted sense of democracy in the ANC. And they did. A friend of mine said that he spoke to an American, and the American didn't know anything about South Africa. He said, what happened to your elections? He said, well, the majority party lost its majority, and then they had a bipartisan deal with the second largest party, and now they govern together. And this American said, that can't be. You know, our guys stormed the Capitol when they lost. So, you know, I think we must say that's a democratic dividend. It is. But unfortunately, it didn't go further because, as someone said, and I don't know who, you can't eat freedom. And that's, I think, the core of what Prof. Lehohla has said. I think we have a crisis already. And I know you call it a demographic crisis. But I think we've got a governance crisis. And that starts right at the top. Pure, proper governance. And it's not just in the government. It's a governance crisis of SOEs, of the government departments. It's even a governance crisis in some universities. So governance crisis first. And that was either brought about or it's exacerbated by a leadership crisis. We don't have leaders. I mean, with a full respect for everyone who sits here, BC. I wouldn't today, I was Vice Chancellor of Northwest University when we had the merger. They would pay me about 10 times they paid me to come back to be a VC today. So I know it's a very difficult job. But present company excluded a lack of leadership. Thirdly, we've got a policy crisis. And I don't think it's just a technocratic crisis. I think what you said about the sort of Friedman, Keynesian is one aspect of it. But I believe, and this may not be the most popular thing to say, that policy gets colored by ideology. And I know, I'm an Afrikaner. That's what the National Party did. When they put on that apartheid glasses, everything looked like they see it, black and white. And then you can't make proper policy. Fact-based policy making did not exist in apartheid, and I'm afraid it doesn't exist now. So it's a policy crisis. And look, there are many other things. I believe that the governing party's ideology of this ridiculous thing called the National Democratic Revolution, I understand they need to use it to rip up the people, but we're a modern democracy. I mean, let's get real. And therefore, many other practices like catered deployment, we today reap the fruits of. That's also part of the leadership crisis. And then finally, it becomes a management crisis. Pure managing institutions. We can't. We don't. With perhaps the exception of the private sector here and there, also not great. And then this obviously leads to what has been said, an economic crisis, an existential crisis, crime, poverty, the three bad things: unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And what the answer to this is, I don't know. I can just agree with people saying that we need to look at a different economic model. We must free up the economy. We've tried this, but with the ideological glasses of the ANC on, and it didn't work. We must try something else. Now, who's responsible? I won't even answer the question. It's the elephant in the room. But who was given an electoral mandate to do this? Now, it wasn't easy, let me say. Many people, and when I speak to whites often, I say, remember that the National Party never governed in a globalized world. Globalization became a fact in 1990, when the transition was already started. So the ANC came in 1994, and all of a sudden they were faced with a globalized world. It's bloody difficult. Alec Irwin said it. He made mistakes. He wanted to be so free that he killed our textile industry. And so open. So it wasn't easy. I'm not saying it was easy. But I think it's been shown not to have worked. And then finally, someone said, Prof said, this DA-ANC thing can't work. I'm afraid there are as many ideological differences inside the ANC. And unless the ANC can sort that out, the DA won't be a patch on that. So, Chair, perhaps I can leave you with two last things on mathematics education and education in general. I feel very passionate. I'm a very strong proponent based upon international experience and research of mother tongue education. And I can tell you, our kids are not dumb. Our kids are not dumb. But they are forced in the first 3 years, in especially rural schools, to learn in their mother tongue without proper textbooks, without proper trained teachers, and then in grade 4 they must go to English. And we then think, are they stupid that they can't make matric? Or why do they, I tell you, and it's not me, it's international evidence. Read UNESCO's papers. We are doing the children of this country a disservice not to have, at least as they say in those research, mother tongue education at least until grade 8. And in a country where you don't have good education resources like ours, at least until grade 10. That doesn't mean English must be kicked out of the door. I'm not fighting the Anglo-Boer War over here. I'm saying, this is your kids, this is our kids. But the government has, with the exception of Angie Macheka in the last 2 years, did that wonderful pilot project in the Eastern Cape, in schools in isiXhosa, I think in 600 schools. And it worked. But there's something that the ANC government doesn't want to do with mother tongue education. So on mathematics, that's the problem. I would say that's 50% of the problem. Finally, the role of the black middle class. You're the black middle class, that's what the Prof said. I spoke to a farmer and his 2 sons, white farmer, Afrikaner farmer from Mpumalanga, a week ago. He came to me as after the Expropriation Act was passed or signed. And he drove from Nelspruit to Pretoria to see me. I don't know why. I don't know him. And he said, is there a future for my son in agriculture in this country? And I didn't lie to him. I said, it could be tough. They now are already being pushed by the Department of Labor in Mpumalanga to give 50% of their farm to a black shareholder. And I said, dissolve the company and do it personally, so you won't be subject to those labor things. But I also said, I think there's a future here. I do believe there's a future here. But don't work for the state and don't work for a big corporate. And I believe, colleagues, that, and the reason I told them that I think things are going to come right at some point is the black middle class. Because the black middle class will not stand for politicians leading them down the garden path forever. You have something to lose. And therefore you say, I won't stand for this nonsense. And at some point it's going to turn. I'm not a prophet, but at some point. And perhaps the ANC will be able to reform itself. I doubt it. I think we'd rather have probably a split or something, and then the others must get together. So Prof, thank you. I hope I can use those slides perhaps to write an article for the Afrikaans people to show them what's happening here. But good luck. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jens. I think it is time now for us to hear from Dr. Masiteng, Dr. Kefilo Masiteng, who is currently the head of Resident Coordinator's Office, UN South Africa. She is very steeped in matters of strategic planning, sustainable development, and the acceleration of SDGs in the run-up to 2030. She previously worked as a Deputy Director General at Statistics South Africa for 11 years and was responsible for censuses and household surveys. This is a very cryptic descriptor. Otherwise, I could go on and then we will leave at 9 p.m. Talk to us, Nick.
Thank you very much. I would like to stand on all the protocols that have already been set. I'm very humbled to have been asked to come and address this annual lecture, and I am very thankful. I think all the answers have been set. The writing is on the wall. But I want to answer very, very, very briefly my boss, SG. He was my boss for 11 years, so I do understand that the questions he's asking have come a long way. It has always been difficult to answer them, but I think when the problems are big, the dreams should be bigger. I think the whole issue of as to whether it is a disaster or not, it will be a disaster if the demographic dividend that this country has got is missed and not taken opportunity of. The demographic dividend that we have should not result into a democratic disaster. I want to take it from all the numbers that have been put. They do not give a very good picture. They are not palatable at all. But when they are not palatable, let them be an opportunity for this country to think bigger and dream bigger and turn the corner. I want to stand to say, let's understand where the problem is. If we talk about the demographic dividend that we have missed, is the fact that we have so many young people in this country that can be put in categories like some are fine. That is that 50% that we talk about. They manage to go to school, they manage to get into employment. But you have about 3.2 million of the young people in this country that are called NEET. And that word has become a fashion, RC. It's like NEET. It's not N-E-A-T, it's N-E-E-T, which means they are not in education, they are not in employment, and they are not in any form of training, and therefore they are marginalized. I think they are the stock that this country has got. If we understand who they are, where they are not dumb. But if we were to understand that this country is at a point where we need to start to innovate and not subject them to our previous and long-term thinking that we have all had about the economy of this country, we will continue not to disrupt the challenges that the economy has got because they are not part of the discussions. I'm talking about the young people in this country. I think the transitions of the young people in this country from whatever level that they would be able to go to school should be where we focus. If we have so many that are sitting at home, we cannot mock them and say, "Uzoyithola kanjani uhleli ekoneni." They are and they can be the game changers of this country, but when we don't see it, it won't happen. And that is where, SG, it will continue to be a disaster waiting to happen. But we do have an opportunity. There are things that should be able to be done. Let us look at how they should transit. Pathways, transitions into the labor market. Should they all go to employment? 30% of them are already beyond matric. Therefore, they are unskilled labor. We are not going to be able to take them into university. What do we do with them? 20% of them are there. They can do a lot, but they are stuck. And if you sit and speak to young people, they tell you, we can see opportunities, but there's no space in Kwele. All of you are there. You have all these ideas. You want to give us all these ideas. If I don't take the ideas from the older people, I do not get funding. I do not get mentored. And then I get stuck. And these are some of the practical issues that they tell us about. They tell us that when we talk about the problems of this country, they cannot relate to those problems. In actual fact, they are sitting and think, if I can innovate, what we saw here is something that can be allowed and be given to young people to start to think about just energy transition as an opportunity in this country. And if just energy happens, it should be that no one is left worse off. These ideas are the ideas they will never come out of all of us. None of us here. Not in any bad way. So I'm raising these issues because I think there are three things that we can do for the young people. Let's allow those that have been able to transit into the labor market to continue to excel. Those that have not been able to transit into the labor market, let not everybody be forced to go into the labor market. Let them go into entrepreneurship. If they go into entrepreneurship, they will create jobs. They will not always all be employees. Not all the 15 million people in this country today that are unemployed will ever make it back into employment. About 3 to 6 million of them are in what we call long-term unemployment. They will never go back into the labor market. So those problems are, when many are left behind, they should not be taken for granted. They can still build this country, but the doors should be opened. Lastly, what one can say is there is a lot that has been done. Everybody has run a youth development program. Everybody asks for money from government to go and run youth development program and goes and collects young people in the location. That money never goes to the young people. And that is when the young people in this country would tell us that we are stuck, we have the ideas, we have the abilities. The human capability in this country is sitting in their brains, but it cannot be used. Last point that I'm going to make, that has been made already by Alson Tabi and Prof. The first thing that should happen in this country is that we should grow the economy. But the economy will not grow if we do not know which sectors we should be able to invest in. We should be able to invest in high labor intensive industries. Two things that we can all gain from those industries. They are all highly infrastructure based. They are all high funding propelled. If that money is not stolen, we would have roads. And if we were to look at a project that builds roads, that problem of unemployment can be dealt with because it's high labor intensive, it can absorb many people, and many people can get into work. If we look at any type of these high-rise buildings
that need to be built so that we can move into modernized ways of doing things. If that infrastructure building can be invested upon, I'm talking investment now in infrastructure, just 18% of the GDP of this country. If it goes into that infrastructure investment, it can be able to create more than these jobs that we are saying are needed. If people go into those jobs, if people go into building schools, building roads, building dams, all the money that has been gone from the water, the water services and water sector, I don't know where it went. But I think there's a lot of money that has gone away that could have created jobs. And yes, it will continue. It does not matter who is in government. The problems will remain: poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And if people are unemployed, there is no way that they can get out of poverty. And if people continue to be poor and others are getting rich, in whatever means that others are getting rich, inequality in this country will continue. The worst that happens is that all these three challenges are sitting across the 80% of the population. So for me, I think if we were to move forward, let's focus, let us be deliberate. It's about youth development, it's about getting the young people to be active, but building human capabilities amongst the young people that we have, so that we do not get into a disaster, but we benefit from the fact that South Africa has got a dividend of demography, because there are young people in this country. Let us get them active. And unfortunately, some of us are getting older. If we continue to get older with these old ideas of ours and blocking the young ideas to come and build this country, I do not think we understand how big that problem is going to be. The future of this country is now, it is not in our hands, it is in the hands of the young people. 50% that makes the unemployment of this country. Disastrous as it may be, it is an opportunity. If we open up our minds, they get mentored, they are given opportunities, we do not block them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ngakamasiti. I think that maybe we should open up the conversation a bit, so that everybody else who has got, it was here. I think we will need to be advised technically. Is it on now? Because I think it was off at some point.
I think they work. You can hear me, ne?
Oh. So what?
If you press the button, we will hear you. Not on your mic here.
But what I'm thinking is, do we need the roving one if
I deliberately requested this one, and I think you might agree with me that it would be easier, unless if you'll facilitate it like that, to ascertain that the questions as they come are spread properly across the room. So I thought it would be easy to say, but I suppose you can advise on that.
No, we'll do it like in a press conference.
Okay, no, it's fine.
We'll do it by rounds, and we'll go from right to left. So if we run into trouble, then we'll change plan.
Our system works, they work, our system.
Yes,
So there's no need for that additional mic. It's actually giving you terrible sound for your system. So
Okay. So they are not. Then there's interference. Yeah. So we will assume then that everyone knows how to work the mics on the thing, like at the UN and stuff like that, where you. Okay. Let's open up the conversation. I think we will start, the first hand I saw here. I think what we'll do, we'll just go by rows, and then again by rows. I think it'll...
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for, my name is Elizabeth, and thanks for the wonderful ideas. I really wish, I looked at one of the slides from Dr. Lehohla there, and I compared South Africa to Nigeria. And you can see in South Africa, it's actually economic capture. Because Nigeria, on that slide, it shows that the money rotates in the community rather than going out. But then the whole question is you make money by selling services and products. And I didn't hear anybody talking about the integration of indigenous knowledge system in services creation, in product creation. If you go to Nigeria, you can buy anything from the dish you're going to use and so on. And again, when you look at, okay, people talk about the industrialization and labor-intensive situations. But then when you go to rural areas, I'm very close to rural areas. It's like an area like Marapshan, we are out of load shedding, but they are still on load shedding. Therefore, there's no manufacturing infrastructure. And again, on the social issues, people are not working on, working on building social cohesion. When you go to rural areas, you want to manufacture bricks, you got to go to layers and layers of protocols, to the chief, to the local, your local surname will count, the councillor will count, the district council will count, the provincial council will count. By the time you want to make the first brick, you are really exhausted, guarding protocols. And by the time you want to make your first brick, there's not even a drying machine to dry your bricks because there's no rural infrastructure to support industrialization. And we don't come, in the midst of climate change, we don't come with alternative built material. How did the old people live? How can we modernize our own perspectives to respond to the reality of today? Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for your input, Elizabeth. I was hoping you'd ask a tough question of the panelists or the prof, but I see you let them get off scot-free. Prof?
And perhaps to create the controversy you want. So my theologian business person, Tennis, is that how it's?
Tiens.
Tiens, yeah. I wanted, to anglicize it after the Anglo-Boer, to use your joke or metaphor. I think it's good to analyze the political party system in the country and the performance. But if we treat political parties as though they are separate entities that exist on their own, without a particular geopolitical, economic, and knowledge histories that have actually decimated the reimagination of such political parties and their impact on the processes of transformation, we would sit here and lament the underperformance of the African National Congress. And we will make that statement without the accountability of the history of the marginalization and how liberation political parties to insert themselves in a geopolitical and global multilateral system could actually create contested terrains. So whilst I really liked your idea of saying the National Party ruled where the globalization wasn't as virulent as the ANC would have experienced it with the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and others being at the center of the determination of policies of countries. I therefore do not think that argument is substantive enough to help me to understand why the ANC failed. I think it's an easy cop-out to say the ANC failed because they couldn't imagine the future, when in actual fact, the risk factors that they were working with, the marginalization, the nominal commitments, especially by the white society, to partner in this imagination. When I say there are multiple groups, there are very progressive white people who saw themselves as part of the anchors of the future of democracy in this country. So I think we can come here and claim to talk on hollowed ground, as though there's no contextual grounding of the articulation of policy systems, of the contestations when policy systems have sought to create inclusive systems. This university, for instance, struggled when it wanted to invest in African languages as languages of sciences, something that you articulate as an important imperative for any innovation system. It was actually sued. I came to a university that was negotiating on how it balances Afrikaans, English, and African languages, and with no commitment to the investment in African languages through court cases, litigations, and so on. Additionally, bad publicity on unwarranted issues. So I'm saying our analysis can be bites, but if we don't go deeper to the real exigencies that derail the democratic dividend, it's within a historical epoch with clear histories of countries that would have gained independence only surviving for 20 years in that demographic. Eddie has just left. He writes about that. And therefore, I thought the works of the Stellenbosch professor, what's his name, has passed on, who wrote on inequality. Who wrote on inequality, contrasting Professor, yes,
Sampi.
Okay. I felt there was a sense of honesty on acknowledging the fault lines of the ANC, as was the case, the fault line of the historical trajectory of the Afrikaner non-committal process. Not all, I'm not generalizing, of those regressive elements in supporting the transformational agenda. So we can come here and be and lose our analytics as though history has not happened. But I think if we really want to promote the cohesion that he's promoting with the experience of theology, of negotiating transformation, and of looking at how we can co-construct a political system, an economic system, a policy system, but also a knowledge and innovation arena that is attentive to some of these chasms. I think then the content of democracy will not be just, and its successes will not just be on the failures of a few, but it is our collective failure that we have not allowed this country to succeed because the policy systems and imperatives have often taken a liberal, individualistic posture. And I think we need to dig deeper with our analytical tools. Otherwise, we will be like journalists who like bites. Sorry.
I've just got it.
I'm a scholar.
I've been recording you. I've been recording you.
One liner. So I like what he said. I like what Tim said. But I think it's important to dig deeper because we can easily say, oh, they failed. But forgetting, for instance, Haiti, the first Black Republic, which fought for the liberation of France. When they want the same things that French had, then they were told, no, you are underhuman. So the same process, if we were to look at the trajectory of historiography, you'll realize that Ghana went through the same experience that we're going through. So we have not lost our brains. They are fully intact. However, we have lost the dignity as scholars, as people, to hold one another accountable on the tools of diagnosis and the tools of imagining the solutions. And that's where we have to hold one another accountable. At this university, we pride ourselves by saying, from whether you're a vice chancellor to a student, we engage in debates that are robust, that enable us to co-construct an emergence or a propulsion of something that is beyond just a smaller community. And I think that's the controversy I want to engage my friend as he engages Professor Lehohla's points.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Can I make a suggestion? Etienne, unless if you are burning to come back again, I wanted to just go around and give other people a chance to raise the issues they feel strongly about, perhaps. Ma'am?
Thank you, Chair.
Say, let us pray.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think at some point we had numbers in this country, especially when it comes to the government, the ANC. And I think there are many things that could have been done at the time to actually deal with the problems, particularly the problems of youth. I think it's my work well. Yeah, let me try this side. So, in my view, the ANC or the government, since its inception, it has not actually dealt with the issue of youth, the NEET, adequately. And I'm saying this because I'm going to make a comparison and a case study of China. Well, maybe China is not the best place to compare, but I think what China did to reduce poverty was quite commendable, particularly amongst the youth. So China, the CCP of China, of course, China is governed differently from us. But the Communist Party, what they did was to take the NEET that Mayor Kifilo was talking about. That NEET was sent to the rural areas. And when they were there at the rural areas, their duty, these were party agents, sort of, and their duty was to help families. You allocated families, around 15 families, to reduce poverty. And what do they mean by reducing poverty in that context when these NET are running? You go and sit in a village because you just came out of matric, but you are not employed at the moment, you are not in any training. And what they did there was to go around to look at which families were supposed to get social grants and are not getting social grants. Because sometimes they cannot write, they don't have IDs, so it's your job to make sure that poor families that are identified within the community do get those resources that they need to get, whether they have a disabled person or what. And their duty was to make sure that by the time they leave the area, someone already has access, because that is pushing towards access to education. The more families don't have resources or any income that is coming, it will be difficult to send their children to schools or for education. And once that is done, it goes up to a level of there's someone who passed matric, no NEFSAS. And we do have this in our rural areas in this country, where people don't even know there is NEFSAS, where people don't even know how to fill up the form if they know about NEFSAS, or how to get the forms for NEFSAS. So there's something that this country could have done in terms of those things. And the other model that they used was in rural areas was to make sure that the road infrastructure in rural areas is perfect. Perfect for what? For couriers to run. Couriers, what do the couriers do? Online purchasing, and where people will grow strawberries, but you know for sure a courier will come because your strawberries are good, you have iPad, you put them there, and then immediately people online can pick up that there are nice strawberries. Yes, and then the couriers will come and deliver to where people are. So I think there are models outside there that we can use as a country to make sure that we channel these young people, this cohort of young people who are not in education, in training, or even in employment.
Okay. Thanks, ma'am. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you very much, Comrade Chairperson, if you may allow. My misfortune is that I now have to comment on commentators because I missed the presentation by the professor. I was captured by the orientation processes at VETS, so I delayed. Sorry.
Okay.
I think the...
But can I capture you even more?
Yes.
By asking that we try and stay a bit brief so we can give everyone a chance.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. The problem of the South African condition is based on the African condition. And as Professor Pashana was speaking, there are historical causalities to this. There are two stubborn questions to which, as African scholars, we are not even attempting to give strong answers. And these two questions are this. How did it become possible that movements that went out to fight for liberation came back having one democracy, which is not liberation? Because democracy is a model of governance which has nothing to do with liberation. In fact, it can secure inequality like it does here in South Africa, where democracy can protect inequality and sustain it here, where even the constitution can be weaponized to protect inequality in the name of property rights and things like that. That is the first question. Why did the people that went out to fight for liberation come back carrying something else? So when people talk about the erosion of the liberation movements in Africa, they do not want to look at the fact that it's now the politics of naming. There are no longer any liberation movements. They have become political parties. The liberation agenda was abandoned decades ago. That's the first question. The second question, I was terrified by the level of statistical analysis that I encountered here. Percentages, ratio, and all that. I'm not saying anything to besmirch the name of statisticians and other quantitative analysts, but I think the human condition is fundamentally qualitative. Before we industrialize, we need to humanize. How does it happen that a continent with such an abundance of human and other natural resources remains with the poorest people under the sun? I've not encountered any mathematician that is able to answer the question why the resources that Africans are working on are not translating to the happiness of the children of Africa. The youth of South Africa and of Africa that we are talking about, you only need to drive down here to Mandela Drive and AutoZone and see where they are and what they are doing. nothing of what is under the soil in Marikana, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Chiatswa, in Zimbabwe, and elsewhere, is translating to their human condition. If those two questions could be answered, maybe we can get closer to giving strong answers to the strong questions that confront the African continent, of which South Africa is part. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thanks very much. Noted. Shall we hear from other people? I hear that we've almost run out of time, but I think that we should give people a chance to breathe, as they say. But let's try and keep it briefly. If we can wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to differ with the first response. I don't think we need to go sell products and services. I think we need to find the problems that is worth solving and solutions that is then worth selling. And if we stop looking for products and services, but then start solving problems like with the air conditioner, right? We just think about things a little bit different. And I want to agree, I think entrepreneurship development is crucial to South Africa. But I also think we are waiting too late to expose the majority of students or kids to entrepreneurship. We only start in grade 7 when they take economic and management sciences for the first time. And then it's very superficial. We need to go and look where economics, where entrepreneurial ecosystems are actually growing. And then they start in grade R. And you don't need to teach entrepreneurship in the way that we teach entrepreneurship here at the university. You need to teach it in a way that they understand. And then lastly, I just want to say, I think targeted education and targeted spending, like we are doing, I think the VC's catalytic niche areas is a way of targeting education into areas where there is jobs available. It doesn't help, like, I don't know which panelist said, we have all these artists and we can make the world a good, beautiful place, but we cannot make money always just from art. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, your comments?
Thank you so much, and I just wanted to add to what she said. I mean, we talked about how do we improve the economy, and we're talking about industrialization and agriculture. But we don't teach our kids at early age agriculture. But we want to make that difference. We are saying that agriculture in the rural area will be our best way to go. That's not possible if we're not actually investing in our students or in our kids understanding agriculture. So until we go back from the basic education and then start to introduce that agriculture at early age, you could not have that. There's no way that as a country we would be stronger in agriculture. So I think that's one of the things that we should realize within our government, to say, if we're saying agriculture will be our best commodity, are we then teaching our students, are we then teaching our kids at early age, at pre-primary, as how she's saying, or at grade R? If that is possible, then that way we could be able to do well in terms of agriculture and we can utilize the land. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. Okay, I'm trying to rush us so that we can go back to the panel and give them 30 seconds of their final thoughts.
Okay, just two comments and questions. One is on to SG, to say if there is such a clash between the Canadian and the Friedman model, do we see a better relationship between the Canadian model and what China is building right now? Because they seem to have communism and the forms of capitalism working in the sense that the Canadian model, from a Roosevelt perspective, with large government spending, a lot of social reform projects, cooperatives, and the rest, things that worked, which seems to be what China is doing. So is there a better relationship between that form of capitalism and what China is doing? And then my second question to SG again is, you mentioned Morena Mohlomi, a great philosopher. What is the role of cultural education in how we approach all our issues? We know that China, before it became the China it is, it went through a cultural revolution. If there's anything Mao Zedong did, with other faults that he may have had, was that he pushed the country into a cultural revolution, and everyone there just carried it on from there. What is the role? How are we thinking around that? Credo Mutwa mentioned that if leaders don't know themselves, how are they going to lead? It goes back to what Professor Diens is talking about, say, bad leadership, bad management. But if we don't know who we are, or have a sense of who we are, how do we lead? And how are we playing? I like what the lady at the corner mentioned when she mentioned about indigenous knowledge systems in the economy. Where is their role in that? Because they will play a huge role in cooperatives. You know, indigenous knowledge systems talk about the economic systems of Letsema and Mafisa. They're all integrated in, yes, it's free trade, free market system, but it's all centered in communal and care for each other. So how are we thinking about that? And I think a lot of those questions are directed at SJ. Thank you.
I'm wanting to not let the SG answer right now. I would like to go to the panel and give them 30 seconds of their final thoughts. Not that they are going to the gallows, but just their very final thoughts, you know, and they say your last wishes kind of thing. These are final thoughts. Who would like to go first?
Thank you very much. Very, very fast from me. I want to agree with the issues of indigenous knowledge. I think we are missing a serious opportunity as a country. Whether we deal with those that try to promote it, I think it is always left in the outskirts. The other critical issue is, I want to agree on the issues of the programs that have been there. In 2001, there was something that used to be called ISRDP, Integrated Sustainable Rural Development Program, which was meant to really build the rural and the sustainable development that does not exist in the manner in which the governance happens. And it is what China managed to do. In China, it doesn't matter even if there is change of guard, the developmental priorities remain. It is not about who is in power. So that remains another part. We used to have what used to be called war in poverty. That was in around 2003. We used to have CDWs that would go into communities. They were employed in hundreds of thousands in this country. We don't have them anymore. And we don't understand why we're having the millions of the young people now on the streets. We also, I think, need to be also take cognizance that even the things that we are talking about, it's about the country that is able to build on what exists, sustain what has been started. It's not about Prof starting something and then when I come in, I think it's about me, and we don't realize that 5 years is not a developmental space. By 5 years, if I don't build on what exists, I will destroy what has been built and I will leave nothing. The last point that I really want to agree with is the Africa issue. The Africa issue is that Africa is walking on a tightrope, because all the benefits that Africa could be able to benefit from, it's just the challenge of having never learned that we have them. We always think they are owned, and therefore our skills are supposed to be sold. We sell our skills, we sell everything that we have, and we remain. We send things to China, they come back, they are produced by selling the very skills of the Africans to China, and then when they come back, we buy them at cost. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Masideng. It sounds like we may have to have a whole session on China in the not too distant future, you know. Jens?
I would like to comment on two issues. I'll end with the social cohesion that I forgot on VC, Prof. Lehohla. Look, I'm not a member of any political party, so I wasn't trying to blacklist, pardon the pun, the ANC. But I think the ANC's failure will be written by history. It's not for me to write it. I think they themselves say, not only have they not done in the last election, but when you talk to intellectuals like Prof. Lucky, the ANC themselves point out that we haven't done well. Now, what the reasons are really is not for me to say. My point is that unless we have better governance, better leadership, better management, we can have all the policies and it won't work. So, I was, by the way, in the period after 1994 involved in two business initiatives, three. The one was the organization where I worked with, where we actually got companies to support the RDP. We wrote a book to say, how can you support the RDP? Then we had Business Against Crime, which was a partnership with government to help bridge that. And then finally we had the Big Business Working Group. And they all fell by the wayside, with the exception of Business Against Crime, when Zuma came into power, because he didn't want anything to do with business. So Mbeki started them in 1999, and it was a time of cooperation, a time of partnerships, but somewhere in the ideology or somewhere in the makeup of the ANC, they started saying, we don't need your help, it's our time now to make mistakes. And that's their right, but now I'm saying they're paying for it. On social cohesion, I can't stress the importance of it enough. I think many people are now saying we've had enough talks, we must now do, that's true too, but we must do both. I'm therefore a big proponent of the national dialogue process, but it must not be driven by government, it must not be driven by political parties, it must not even be driven by the foundations alone. It must be driven by civil society, but government must pay for it. They must appoint this body, 30 people, put the SG on first, and they can oversee the process. And it would probably take a year, but it will give people an outlet. And I think, in a sense, it will give us an agenda of what really is important. Because remember, lobby groups out there think that their issue is the most important. But we need executable priorities. We can't do everything at the same time. And I hope that national dialogue will not only do that, but it will also give communities at the local level a way of saying, wow, what you need is exactly what I need. When I speak to people, I say, look, what ordinary people want, whether they're white, black, or green, are the same things. And I think that's the value of social cohesion.
Thanks, Jens. I was wondering whether Mr. Swanepoel is still with us.
I am with you still, yes.
Okay.
Let me just try this.
Would you?
Right. I
very
think
briefly, yes.
It's all about the economy, stupid. And at the end of the day, if you look at what we've been saying about having to have industrialization, to develop cooperatives, to get broad-based economic empowerment, without having the necessary economic infrastructure in place, it's all a waste of time. We need to get our harbors working. We need to get the rail system working again. We need to get our ports operational, etc. And all of this needs to be funded. Where's that money going to come from? That's the big question. Now, if you look at state capture, it is estimated that some 1.9 trillion rand was lost due to state capture. Now, imagine where our economic infrastructure could have been had we not had that state capture. But that's spilt milk. We need to look further. And what I am thinking is that we need to rethink Keynesian. We need to rethink the way we see debt. We're having huge austerity measures. We're seeing government departments cannot deliver. Education, teachers are being cut, everything, etc. It's because we are trying to reduce debt far too quickly. And we see debt as a bad thing. But not all debt is bad. Yes, consumption debt is bad, but investment debt is good. And I think that we need to rethink our policies around debt so that we can get our economic infrastructure right. Now, with that, also, I think it's time to maybe rethink the tax system. We're talking about social cohesion, we're talking about huge inequalities, we're talking about solidarity, etc. But we're continuing as if it's a business as usual. And I really think it's time for the wealthy in the country to maybe look at something like a solidarity tax to kickstart the youth development and to kickstart cooperative projects. That's my closing thoughts.
Thanks, Mrs. Swanepoel. Yeah. Dr. Mliko, do you want to... well, what did they say? We save the best for...
I don't know about that, but I'll be very quick and snappy. I think I want to start with the point made, the ones that I captured when I was able to hear. I think the issue of how to change the perceptions of the rural population, but also the issue of agriculture not being taught to our kids. I think not even my grand, she passed on, she was 103 when she passed on. When we used to go visit her in the rural areas, we used to grind mealie meal. We used to make our own bread from, I'm not talking about a generation that is deceased. There are people here that are in the same generation, my mother who grew up and her brothers and our aunts and uncles and all those that grew up in the generation. In the rural areas, now the systems are there, the indigenous knowledge is there. I don't know why we act like these things are not there. In our very generation, there are living beings who actually produced food was made in the rural areas. They didn't rely, if ShopRite were closed down now, most of us would basically go hungry because we're reliant on the retail system. But in the rural areas, people lived and they ate from what they grew. They drank the milk from the cow. We drank that warm milk, and then they made it into sour milk, or amasi, and so forth. All of these things are things that can be done, but our people something has changed in our people and in the hearts of the people. The dependency syndrome has crept. The dependency on the state, even in the urban areas, it's not just in the rural areas. Our people now, instead of the dignity of our people being protected, most men or families would want to build their own house, would want to build their own structure because there's dignity in building something for yourself. But now something has switched where we want to now command it and make a demand on the state, such that we don't necessarily take any responsibility. So I think that from a moral perspective, something has gone wrong. We almost take no responsibility for anything. Even families demand from the state everything. And we can argue about the metrics from the impact of social grants, the impact of giving a mother's child grants, what the impact is. There's been a lot of studies saying that there's no correlation to childbirth and pregnancy. However, anecdotally, if you look on the ground, what has happened, and when you listen to people and the impact, it's a different story. So you can go to the root of it is, let's bring the dignity of our people back. Let's enable our people to build their own homes, to build their own futures, to contribute to their own livelihood, but give them the tools to do that. So I think that in order for you to do that, it's not just the mind. So the mind of the African people, once you democratize, this is what happens now with democracy, is that this dependency syndrome is almost masked on the people. I don't know what happens. It's got to do with the policies. It's got to do with the mindset of the people. We're no longer responsible. And also, I'd say democracy, and this is I don't know what's controversial or what, but democracy is almost like a religion. Democracy has been sold to us as the solution to everything. But this democracy that we've been sold and we've embraced is linked with the same economic framework that the colonial masters had in 1884 when they came here. Nothing has changed. The minerals are exported. We talk about economic infrastructure. Ask yourself, why was there such an outcry when Transnet and the rail system wasn't working, the ports and all of that? It's because they couldn't send out the coal as quickly to make the money because commodity prices were high. They couldn't send out the gold. They couldn't export the platinum quick enough. It's not because they're sending it to industrial zones or these SEZs and to produce it. When you talk economic infrastructure, we're not talking economic infrastructure to regenerate productivity and to add value, beneficiation. We talk about it all the time. But where is the economic infrastructure to make sure that there's IDZ nodes in our cities and even in the rural areas? It's not there. When you talk economic infrastructure, you're talking about sending it to China, India, Belgium, UK, US, and so forth. It's not about us. So we've got to reconfigure these discussions. I think the last point I want to make is that the schooling system has to be reconfigured. You've got to, from a young age, educate our people to take responsibility, and also children. But the adults themselves are a problem. Look at what happened now with the Trump announcement of aid cutting. Let's say aid cut. Whoever cut it, I don't care whether it was Trump or whomever. So what? Aid must not be what we rely on to solve our national problems. Why are we so reliant on aid to solve our own problems? They don't owe us anything as the state. And so, as I close, we've got to stop being price takers on our mineral resources. OPEC is a good example. They don't take price. They are actually control supply. They can lessen or increase because they have an organization called OPEC, where members join, where they agree, let's withhold supply, let's extend. I think that the economic infrastructure must be built around us being productive and not just exports. And I think the last point is the mining model. I don't want to start because then I'll way be over time. But this mining endeavor happening, if the mining model is still the same and entrenched on just exporting and bringing in investors and giving mining rights to the liberals and to big capital, I agree with Dr. Swanopu when he says we're going nowhere fast. Yes. Chinua Achebe says things fall apart. So in mining, until we change things, things will continue to fall apart because we want to be beneficiaries. And Botswana is a good example where you can share profits, share revenue, but also have the gains to the private sector. They cannot take everything. And I think we've got to change that model. Thank you.
Dr. Muleko, Dr. Mulwato, Dr. Muleko, I'm glad you came back. And I want to stop this because I think half the people were starting to doze off a bit. Being taken over by the aircon. So thank you very much. Thanks very much for all the panelists. Prof, I'm sure you will not kill me if I skip you and go to Dr. Mulwato to close for us. Otherwise, I will be slaughtered. Prof, did you want to say something?
Mike, it's not a comment. We will try to write a summary of these things because it's recorded and send it out. So that it starts to take the dialogue on the things that came out here.
Yes.
To be rolling and start informing other interactions.
Yes.
I just thought I must mention
Yes.
that it's
Yes.
not Skulumil and then what.
Yeah, like a tree falling
Yeah,
in the
it's not like
forest.
Skulumil and then what. Thank you.
Yeah, Prof.
The one on development communication. We like slogans, and they are ephemeral and they disappear. But I think there is a core lesson from KwaZulu-Natal, probably because the ANC was the ruling party, but in other provinces it was the ruling party too. But when we go to KwaZulu-Natal and it comes out of the data itself, Operation Skumasake is understood in KwaZulu-Natal because it was embedded as a system. I'm not sure now that the ruling party is the IFP and the coalition.
And others.
I don't know whether they'll sustain Operation Skumasake as a language. But it's very interesting that from the ground, people are saying we are talking about Operation Skumasake. So I think the ownership of the development language by society and not as a political party is so important. And embedding that will be essential. I'll have a discussion on the other questions that were asked.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siluma. Dr. Lehohla, as we close, and based on what you just said, I then had to go to beyond what Dr. Muleko was saying, go back as early as 1658. The Amersfoort question, problem, the creation of the first school in South Africa. And there were two purposes or reasons why a school was created. First was to teach Dutch. Secondly was for Christian education. So I wonder where statisticians are fitting there, mathematicians. Perhaps it's a question for another day to assist us unpacking this question. Everything was high. I think we agree today. It was high level. The organizing component, Professor Matebula, the ED, Tate Tobela, and we'll also agree that keynote speaker, high level, panelists, high level, moderator, high level, and the VC will agree with me, even the room temperature was high level. As we close this, I want to thank everyone who attended here and participated, and wish that the question that was asked, whether a democratic dividend or demographic disaster, what is to be done, sometimes to be or not to be is a question. So let's allow that through what the sponsorship of what that day Prof. Matebula has submitted, we shall take over this discussion forward, but also translate it into other programs of action, so that through it we better our society and develop it. Ha ke leboha ka mantswe a jwalo, ke lebohile haholo Ntate Lehohla le Bamphato. Ke a leboha. Then this brings us to the end of this. Ntate Matebula, there is a common biblical saying on behalf of Dr. Thames. It says that as I look up to the mountain, where will my help come from? The issue of MOU and the venue will always come from the mountain. That's why you had to give a venue here, because your answers were here at UNISA, and looking forward to working with you in future projects. Thank you very much.
Dumelang, good evening. Thank you. This was indeed high level. Thank you, UNISA, for inviting us and for hosting us. And as BPI, we'd like to thank Prof. Pali Lehohla. Educational, good perspective, good insights, but it has left lots of questions too, right? But to the speakers, each one of you, the perspectives you've given us, we've got some food for thought. We've got work to do, South Africans, and we've got work to do for our kids, for the generations that follow. Every one of the commentators in this room has made me think about what do I want to do next tomorrow. I hope you are leaving with something that you're going to do tomorrow, exactly tomorrow. To the organizers, Tobela, thank you for instructing me to come. This was more than insightful, and I've got all sorts of questions that I want to ask the panelists as we walk out. And Dr. Muleko, your voice is heard. I have never been instructed to be deliberate about my life like I have today. Thank you. Thank you, Darrell Swanepoel, for joining us from other places. And I wish to invite each one of you to stay for a few minutes, because we've got a photo session that we need to take, and we've got refreshments outside. I thank you all, and have a good evening. Drive safely back home.
Oh, wow, thank you.